I am thrilled to have with me today Mr. Stephen Fitch, who prefers Steve, so it'll be Steve from here on out. And Steve is the CEO and founder of Eden Reforestation Projects. So it's incredible what this group is doing, and I cannot wait to get into it. But let's start with asking you first, Steve, what got you into this? You've been doing this for over 17 years, it's looking like. How did you think to apply your career to reforestation?
Well, the short answer is I didn't think to apply my career to forest restoration. The long story short is I was working very part-time in Ethiopia doing development projects um, right after the transition from the communist government to the new government. Bottom line is built a hospital, medical clinics, schools, HIV daycare center, and I got to be friends with President Haile Mariam, at that time the Southern People's Region. He later became the prime minister, but he's the individual that asked me to take over a failed forest restoration project at a place called Uduwatete. And it came out of the blue. He basically said, you get a lot done, you know how to raise money, you know how to organize things. Would you take this over? And gulp, I'll consider it. And I spent time with the village elders and found out that the incredible hardship and difficulty that they had experienced following the destruction of their regional forest, the loss of life, the decline in farming, etc. And I ended up saying yes and turned the situation around with the help of many others, of course. But that's the story.
Okay, that is a unique story. You being able to share that unique expertise and really bringing the focus not just to restoration of trees, but to seeds as well, and why these seeds are so relevant to these various communities.
When it comes to seeds, I know it's probably a goofy analogy, but seeds are to forest what dollars are to banks. You got no dollars in the bank, you got no bank. And one of the biggest challenges of forest restoration is finding the right seeds, especially what's called the pioneer species seeds. Those are the trees that grow first, are the hardiest, almost always nitrogen fixing, more resistant to drought and other problems. And with radical deforestation taking place all over the world, you are challenged to find seeds.
And of course, like you said, seeds are a precursor to the trees, right? And by 2023, you plan to plant 1 billion trees per year and 1 billion by per month by 2030. So talk about scaling. Talk about really having learned how to scale and how to scale intelligently and successfully. So what are the key things that have allowed you to scale?
Scaling is something that takes time and takes a lot of trial and error. Have you ever heard of Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers?
A fellow behavioral scientist that I shared a episode of Quest for Craft with.
Yeah, and I mean, he has some brilliant insights. And one of his books, Outliers, talks about the 10,000 hour rule. And at 17 years, Eden's 17 years old now. We've had far more than 10,000 hours, but we operated in obscurity. And, typical nonprofit, how do we pay the bills? How do we get by? How do we do what we do for the first probably 13 to 14 years of our existence? And that's when we were learning and growing and figuring out all the complexities of our work. And here's the part that most people don't understand. Planting trees is the easy part. Growing, planting, producing trees is the easy part. All of the complex mechanisms of building this forest restoration machine is the hard part. You got to raise money. You have to prove that you're doing what you say you're doing. you have to get the message out, and you have to manage all the employees in the U.S. and globally. And right now we have, I think we're up to 14,500 global employees. Imagine the challenge of managing that many people in 200 plus sites across 12 project nations. Most of those sites are remote, and getting them paid and keeping them on track. And scaling is hard. Um, and it's the mechanics associated with the organization that's the hardest part.
That's insightful. You're right. Planting the trees is the easy part, and it's everything else that comes with it. But the beauty of what comes out of this is it also gives an ability for local communities to get involved, to take pride in solutions that are going to be benefiting them and their future generations. So, how do we use these restoration projects to empower local communities? And why is it so important to work with local communities? It's not just feel good for them, but actually it's going to determine the success of this effort.
You have to benefit the local population because they are a part of the environment, the ecology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We hear you loud and clear on that. And it's so critical that we are able to create those partnerships. From your vantage point, how would you, what would you tell individuals and companies that want to help with restoration, how they could begin to get involved?
First and foremost, have the companies do a search of what organizations are out there that fit their specific objectives. Eden Reforestation Projects is a true native species restoration organization. And other groups prefer, for instance, agroforestry. They want that to go that route. We are a native species group. So if you like us or you like agro, select your organization, get involved, start donating, start being an advocate for the cause, and get the word out, because unity is the key to reaching some of the seemingly impossible goals of restoring the global forest in the next 10 years or so.
Fantastic. And how about individuals? Is there a role for individuals to play as well?
Sure, I'm an individual and I support my own organization rather substantially every single month. With our organization, every 15 cents, with the exception of Brazil, it's 33 cents plants a tree.
It absolutely is. Thank you so much for having committed your career to this really important solution to the climate crisis. And nature based solutions is a no brainer. This is what we're trying to put out there and have people really begin talking about it. The same way we talk about pop culture and politics, we should be talking about solutions to some of the biggest risks that we are facing collectively. So, thank you for your global perspective and for the restoration work that you are doing that is so critically important, more than ever, especially now. So much appreciated, Steve. Keep it up,
My
and look
privilege.
forward to talking again soon.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome, Marion. We are so excited to have you. To the audience, Dr. Marion Chow is the head of seed banking for Terraformation, and she's the founder and co-chair of the IUCN Seed Conservation Specialist Group. It's a collaboration of over 100 specialists worldwide that provide expertise to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Marion has unparalleled expertise in seed conservation and storage, including technical training at the world's largest seed bank for native species at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, England. You had so many things to choose from your resume, Marion, but I pulled that one out because I've had the pleasure of going to Kew Gardens and it's so absolutely stunning. So I just want to kick off by saying, wow, what an incredible career you've had. So for those who might not fully know what it means to be in seed banking and conservation and storage, tell us, what does this really mean, and what does a day at Terraformation look like for you?
Thank you so much for the kind words and the lovely introduction. I'm really happy to be here. So seed conservation broadly is essentially collecting seeds from the wild and preserving them in a way that keeps their viability strong so we can use them in the future, essentially. And so we do a lot of this through seed banking. and I am head of seed banking at Terraformation. And so my team consists of actually the trainers, essentially, the training and support for seed bankers around the world. We also have an on the ground seed bank team that manages Terraformation's seed bank, and I also support them as well. So, what they do on the ground is they go out and they collect seeds from different locations, forests in the wild, where we can use those seeds for reforestation efforts here in Hawaii. And then my team that I manage more remotely, we're all over the world. They are in Colombia and Italy, and they help to support our partners who are also all around the world in training and understanding how to use the seed banks that we've given to them or provided to them through Terraformation's efforts.
That's super cool. So this is, I mean, clearly a collective global effort that's underway here. And
Yeah.
the reason for that, well, what's the reason for that? Why are seeds so key to solving this climate crisis that we're in?
Seeds are just so essential for solving the climate crisis because lots of reasons, but I think one of the biggest reasons to understand is that both biodiversity and genetic diversity are really essential when we're talking about restoring ecosystems. So if we need to plant 1 trillion trees in the world, we could potentially go make clones like a million of the same tree and plant those clones around the world and quickly plant millions, billions, 1 trillion trees. However, if they have no genetic diversity, then that all million of those trees that we've planted, if they face some kind of threat that they're susceptible to, they will all be lost. And as climate change continues, we're only facing more threats, more varied threats, more severe threats, and more frequent threats that these forests are going to have to be resilient to, essentially. So by collecting seeds, and if we source the seeds properly and correctly, then we're getting a lot of different genetic diversity from a lot of different mother trees and mother plants. Planting those out, also increasing our species diversity by collecting seeds from different species, and essentially growing forests that are going to be really resilient to future threats and can also become self-sustaining. So we don't have to always go back and be maintaining the forest constantly. That's what we want.
Nice. Okay, so you answered my next question, which was why do we need to plant more than one type of seed, right? Well, why would we even want to do that? So is it because certain seeds are easier to actually collect? What would the reason be to diversify seeds? Isn't that kind of naturally how it is anyway? We can collect all these different seeds, or no, that's not the case.
Well, so if I understand your new question right, it can be challenging to collect seeds from some species, right? So a lot of people right now, people doing restoration on the ground, they're somewhat limited by what seeds are available or what plants are available, right? A lot of them actually buy plants from local nurseries, and that might only be a couple of species that they've figured out how to grow fast and well, right? And if we were to restore an area with just a few of those species, we might be missing different parts of the ecosystem. So if we only plant the trees, we don't have the understory. And, I've actually visited one of our partners' restoration sites they actually planted it 20 years ago, and they did a really nice, diverse native canopy overstory, right, trees, but they kind of forgot to put the understory in and hoped it would come in on its own. But because they didn't have good seed sources from natural areas nearby, but they did have a lot of weeds that they were struggling with, essentially the weeds came in and they weren't able to establish that full healthy forest ecosystem. And now 20 years later, they're still fighting invasive species in that restored forest. So the idea is we really need to collect seeds and plant from all the different components of the ecosystem, and as much as we can try to model that after a native reference ecosystem. So Mother Nature knows what she's doing, right? So we're going to try to copy what she's doing to the best of our ability, essentially.
Right. Why recreate the wheel, right? We've already got this
Yeah.
solid and figured out. So, okay, excuse my naivety here, but you explained this so well. So now I have to get some of these questions answered because it really makes sense when you describe it.
Oh,
Why
good.
do we need to worry about how many seeds we have, right? So I understand why we need to collect different seeds. I understand that some are harder to get than others because of the reasons you just gave, but why does it matter how much we have? Can't we, once we have the seeds, can't we just continue to generate more of them relatively easily, or no?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it can be hard. Well, okay, sorry. First of all, I should say, in order to plant 1 trillion trees, we're probably going to need 3 trillion, maybe more seeds, because at every stage of the process, we're going to lose some, right? So we collect the seeds. Then the next step is germinating them, and they won't all germinate, right? That's what happens naturally, is that they're not all going to be viable. It's, selection for the strongest trees that are going to actually survive, or the plants that will survive. So we need to allow for that, right? So that we end up with strong plants. And then once we plant those plants out in the wild, we're also going to have, some that don't survive as well. Same reason, right? So it's like the ones that are best fit for the environment, they'll survive, they'll grow strong, and they'll create that forest. But we need to allow for those losses, because it is also, again, what happens in nature. Um, and then it depends on the methods you're going to use for restoration. So it's great if you can plant all of your, all the species that you're trying to reintroduce, but you may need to use a combination of some planting and some like broadcast seeding, where you literally just spread the seeds out into the environment and hope that you get, a good amount of them germinating and growing on their own. But to do that kind of method, you have to accept that you're going to lose even more seeds.
I'm just going to keep asking you questions because it's really elucidating. I really appreciate this. Why do we need
Yeah.
decentralized seed bank networks? Why is that important?
Great question. So, right now in the world, we've actually just recently done research and put out a white paper that talks about where seed banks are in the world and how many more we need. It's called the Global Seed Bank Index. And so we did find 410 seed banks around the world that store at least some native seeds. And they aren't necessarily all focused on restoration, but they could contribute to those efforts. However, a lot of the seed banks that currently exist in the world are focused more on long-term conservation and preservation of things like endangered, threatened, and rare species. And, rightfully so, because that's a really critical piece of conservation work that needs to happen. But what we really need to, we need those efforts to continue happening, absolutely. But we also need seed banks to support restoration, large, massive scale restoration in the world, right? We need, we've talked about we need trillions of seeds in order to do this. And we can't just go out and collect all of those seeds right now. That would absolutely be unsustainable harvest, right? We can't take too much from the environment. So the idea of seed banking is that we can, if we have a lot of seed banks around the world and we network them together, we can, you know, mindfully collect seeds in different areas and using methods that are sustainable and preserve those seeds in the seed bank, not necessarily for decades or centuries like some of the big seed vaults do, but for short periods, a few years, so that we can have seeds available for continuous propagation. So even if we couldn't collect seeds one year because of bad weather or any other kind of situation, we could then take seeds from the seed bank that year and keep propagating our plants and keep planting them out to do that restoration work.
Thank you for explaining all of that. Really appreciate it. What's your favorite seed? Or if you're working in this space, is it impossible? Is it like trying to choose between children? Is there any one seed you really enjoy more than another, and why? If the answer is
It
yes.
is so hard to choose, right? Even if people ask me what's my favorite plant, it's hard to choose. But for me personally, I think that one of my favorite seeds, at least, is a species called ohia, which is actually our keystone forest tree here in Hawaii. The ohia tree, which is also in the genus Metrosideros. A lot of them are Metrosideros polymorpha. It's a really amazing, beautiful tree that's super variable, and it's found in all different kinds of ecosystems in Hawaii. But unfortunately, it's under threat right now by a disease called rapid ohia death. And so I actually, prior to joining Terraformation, I started a seed banking initiative to collect and bank seeds of ohia to help with resistance testing for this disease, and also to just bank them for future restoration efforts. So I do love that seed.
Well, I hope we can get some pictures and some
Yeah.
B-roll of this tree, the seed and the tree, and be able to juxtapose that next to your your commentary on it. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us today. Really appreciate you joining Restoration Conversations. Thank you, Marion.
Thank you so much.